All right. Oh, where did I go? There I am. Okay. Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Ah, there we go. All right. So today is another of my favorite topics, in fact. Um, so last time, well, not last time, last week, we spent a good bit of time talking about functionalism, which I like because, well, I guess my area of interest, my primary area of interest is, thinking machines, um, which, depending on your theoretical inclinations, could include us. This week, we're going to kick it off with mental causation, another of my favorite topics because it gets to some I think, pretty important questions and some pretty challenging issues concerning agency. And I'll try and highlight some of those as we proceed today. So I wonder, what did you make of the way that Kim begins this chapter with the little bit that he quotes from Proust's "Remembrance of Things Past"? People aren't too talkative today. But I think you see well, I'm really hoping that everybody did in fact read that part. But it's an illustration of what Kim says here, that mental phenomena are intricately and seamlessly woven into the complex mosaic of causal relations of the world, or so it seems at least. And of course, the example from Proust has our character. I don't know any of their names. I'm not really a literature buff. But we have our character taking a drink of tea with some of these little Madeleines, these little, they're like a biscuit sort of thing, dipped into it. And all of a sudden, he's brought back in time well, as the title states, he's remembering things past, right? He remembers how he used to enjoy this tea with his aunt. Remembers the house that he did it at. And so here we have an example of mental causation, right? We have the tea, the flavor of the tea, the experience of drinking the tea, which triggers a memory. So that's physical to mental causation. Those memories trigger other memories, which is mental to mental causation. And of course, we can talk about, and we will talk about, mental to physical causation. This caused some interesting mental stuff to happen in me the first time I read um, this example. Rather less mundane. I mean that in the sense of worldly, because whenever I think of tea, I think of Captain Picard, who drinks Earl Grey tea. Reading Proust, he's talking about his tea and remembrance of all these things from the past, which reminded me of watching, episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation in syndication. So that's a sort of mental. Well, there's the physical act of reading, so physical mental causation. I'm reading what Kim is quoting from Proust. Um, I'm sort of running through the scenario that Proust has the reader um, not imagine, but this scenario, this sort of chain of memories that he's telling the reader about, which elicits the recollection of certain other memories in me, and which may do the same for you, perhaps differently. Maybe it just reminded you that you also enjoy tea, or perhaps tea is associated with something else, some other set of memories for you, right? Um, Other examples. Well, we've talked about physical to mental and mental to mental, but mental to physical, an example of mental to physical causation might be something like, I don't know, thinking to yourself after reading this, oh boy, I'd really like a cup of tea, and then going and making one. And that's a rather complex example. Um, because it involves all these beliefs and desires, beliefs about how tea kettles work and where the tea bags are, etc., and desires, namely the desire for a cup of tea. Um, a simpler example might be, you know, willing my hand to go up. So my intention, my volition, whatever you want to call it, causes my hand to go up. So that would be mental to physical causation. So, yeah, just to sort of, well, I'll quickly go over this slide because we have the taste of tea, a physical event causing a mental event, memories. Mental events can cause other mental events. Um, and as I just said, whether you're, reading this and you think, oh, I'm forming the desire for a delicious cup of tea. Um, and then you go and make one. That's a mental event causing a physical event. Um, the way that uh, this is the way it seems to us. Um, and the question, I guess, that we're concerned with today is whether it all actually works that way or whether it merely seems that way. And that's why I find this chapter so interesting, because we're engaging with, as I said earlier, issues that are sort of right at the crux of agency and free will. We're going to be tackling the worry, or actually a number of worries over epiphenomenalism, which, if you'll remember from previous lectures, um, is the view that mental states or mental events are effects and not causes. That's one version. That's the version we'll be talking about the most today. But the idea is that mental effects, as I often put it, are all effect, or mental events are all effect, no cause. So, it's also related to the mind-body problem, right? Which is where we, not exactly where we began, but our second chapter, Mind as Immaterial Substance, introduces the mind-body problem. Um, and Kim does this through the substance dualism of Rene Descartes, right? Remember those famous exchanges between Descartes and Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia? Uh, how could it be that physical events or material mechanistic occurrences, as Descartes would have described them, like, for example, the environment affecting your sense organs, how could that cause a sensation, a perception, etc.? Um, how could mental events, again, like the intention to raise one's arm, to ask a question, cause one's arm to go up? Descartes thought it all happened because of the animal spirits, well, the muscles and nerves, the animal spirits, which kind of flow throughout the body and affect or are affected by the pineal gland. Um, and of course, the soul somehow interacts with the pineal gland, right? That's how Descartes explained it. But, as Princess Elizabeth quite rightly pointed out, there are problems with this view. So that's how it's related to the mind body problem. Here's the way Kim puts it on page 195. He says, if your mind is going to cause your limbs to move, it presumably must first cause an appropriate neural event in your brain. But how is that possible? How can a mind, or a mental phenomenon, cause a bundle of neurons to fire? Through what mechanisms does a mental event, like a thought or a feeling, manage to initiate or insert itself into a causal chain of electrochemical neural events? And how is it possible for a chain of physical and biological events and processes to burst, suddenly and magically, into a full-blown conscious experience, with all its vivid colors, shapes, smells, and sounds? Think of your total sensory experience right now: visual, tactual, auditory, olfactory, and the rest. How is it possible for all of this to arise out of molecular activities in the gray matter of your brain? Well, let's leave off all the stuff about consciousness, because after all, we are going to have well, a couple of lectures on consciousness next week. And let's focus on causation, mental causation, as it's related to agency. So we'll bracket the really tricky questions about how, these neurochemical interactions in the brain result in, a subjective, qualitative conscious experience, as well as how, how can my consciousness affect the physical, if indeed it does. We'll leave those questions aside for now, and we'll just talk about mental causation and agency, and then get to the rest. Now, what is agency? Agency is something that agents have. What are agents? Well, agents are beings who can act on the basis of reasons. One of the ways that you can unpack this is to think of agents as the causes of their own actions, or um, that agents are the type of beings um, whose reasons for acting are the cause of their actions. So think of the difference in a situation like this, right? Moving your leg because you want to. Like maybe you're sitting in one of those uncomfortable chairs in a lecture hall, say. And you feel a little uncomfortable and you feel like you have to sort of shift your position around to get comfortable again. So you decide to move. That's an intentional act. You had a reason to move your leg and you acted on the basis of that reason. That is an agentive action. That's different from when, for example, a physician taps you on the knee with a patellar hammer and your knee, your leg kind of jerks due to a reflex. In that case, that's just like an occurrence, just a happening. Um, but in the case where you move your leg because you're feeling uncomfortable, and you had a reason for doing so, that is an agentive action. You are the cause of that action. It's not caused by something else, like the doctor hitting your knee with the patellar hammer. So, clear so far on the notion of agency? Excellent. Remember the belief, desire, action principle? We covered this earlier in the book. But just so that we remember it, we'll go over it again. The desire, belief, action principle, or DBA, states that if agent S desires something and believes that A is an optimal way um, of securing it, S will do A. So if I desire a cup of tea and I believe that putting the kettle on is an optimal way of securing my desire, then I will get up and put the kettle on. But this might be too strong. After all, sometimes we decide not to act on our desires, or sometimes we try and modify our desires before we act on them. What are some examples? Well, a desire that I'm often struck with is a desire for pizza. Delicious, delicious pizza. But, I'm getting older. Metabolism is slowing down a little bit. And if I were to act on all of my pizza desires, um, well, let's just say I might continue to become doughy, right? Um, uh, when you start getting older, and I'm going to be 40 this year. Hope that's not TMI. But when you start getting older, you start thinking about how life is going to be in your next 40 years, say. Um, so I might have a desire for an extra large pizza. Um, but I might say to myself, okay, I have that desire, but I also have another desire, which is to maintain a healthy fitness level, say. And that's going to be harder to do if I'm full of pizza all the time. So I do not act on the desire. Perhaps I have another desire, again, like being healthy, which sort of supersedes my desire for pizza. Sometimes we try and modify our desires. Well, okay, what's an example of that? Well, I have a desire for pizza, but maybe I form another desire where I desire to desire less pizza and try and modify my pizza desires that way. So I try to modify my pizza desires by seeking out other foods that are really, really yummy, but perhaps not as full of calories as the pizza. So maybe I try and modify my desire such that I increase my desire for salad and decrease my desire for pizza. Other examples? Everybody's quiet today. All right. Well, sometimes. Oh, Adrian, go ahead.
Hello? There you go. I guess getting like bad medical news that you want to that like if you don't do this, X could happen. Like so you start then oh okay I could die for that if I don't straighten up I guess.
Yeah, like quitting smoking, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. You might desire that nicotine fix, but you might also desire not to die. Um, so you try and modify your desires. There are also, of course, cases where we could be constrained or prevented from acting on our desires. Um, Continue with the pizza example, right? When I was younger, we lived in the middle of nowhere, basically. So I might have had a desire for pizza, but no means of acquiring pizza because there were no pizza shops around, right? Or we might have been in town, and I might have said, I'm a little kid here, right? So I might say, "Hey, mom, I want pizza," and my mom might say, "No, we're not going to get pizza," right? So I might be prevented from acting on my desire. So if DBA is too strong because of these considerations, we can always modify it a little bit. We can tinker with it as we need to, but something like the desire belief action principle remains fundamental to understanding ourselves as agents. Right? We could, for example, modify it in a number of ways, like saying that um, maybe an agent needs good reasons to act. So let's go back. If I desire something and I believe that doing A is an optimal way of securing it, I will do A. But maybe my reasons have to be really good ones. Or maybe we can treat this somewhat probabilistically, right? We could say that maybe I believe that doing A is an optimal way of securing S or securing A, but rather than S will do A, we'll say S will likely do A, right? Make it probabilistic. Um, Maybe we have to think about many different belief desire chains. Um, so we could have good reasons, but also motivating reasons for doing what we do. So let's try and think of an example here. Um, a motivating reason. Well, I might desire pizza because I like pizza. That may or may not be a good reason, but maybe I only order pizza because I have a friend coming over and I'd like us to have something nice to eat. So sure, I like pizza. That's a good reason to get pizza because you like pizza. But the reason that's motivated me to actually, to actually order the pizza is my motivating reason. I've got company coming over. I'd like us all to have some yummy pizza, right? So, and you can see that this gets quite complicated, right? Um, there might be lots of reasons, lots of belief desire chains at play. And it's hard to pick out what exactly causes our agent to act. Um, Donald Davidson's account states that the reason why an agent did what they did is the cause of that action. So, to put it in the way that Kim does on 197, what makes a reason for an action an explanatory reason is its role in the causation of that action. Why did I order pizza? I was hungry, and I believed that ordering pizza was a good way to satisfy my hunger. Or why did I order the pizza? I had a friend coming over, and I've told him about this pizza place, but he hasn't tried it yet. And since we both like pizza, I'll get some pizza from a really good pizza place down the street. Um, whatever reason was the cause of my behavior, or that's the reason why the agent that's the reason for what the agent does, um, or the reason why the agent does what she does. That's the cause of the action in question. And what all this where are we going with all this? Well, where we're going is we're trying to show that agency is only possible if mental causation is possible. Because all the things we've been talking about here, acting on the basis of reasons, whether that's ordering a pizza, raising one's hand to ask a question, shifting around in an uncomfortable chair in order to get more comfortable. We're acting on the basis of reasons. The reasons are the causes of our actions. The reasons why we do these things that we do are the causes of those actions. And you can see, I think, pretty straightforwardly that this is only possible if, in fact, mental causation is possible. Because here we've got, a belief desire chain, which causes me to shift in my chair or raise my hand to ask a question or pick up the phone or, well, I guess use an app on your phone to order pizza, right? This is the way Kim puts it. Kim says, an agent is someone who is able to act for reasons and whose actions can be explained and evaluated in terms of the reasons for which she acted. This entails that reasons, that is, mental states like beliefs, desires, and emotions, must be able to cause us to do what we do. That's another thing about agents and agency that I ought not to forget to mention. Agents act on the basis of reasons. Agents can also give agentive explanations for the actions that they've undertaken. So, for example, why did I order the pizza? You ask. Well, I was hungry. Or, oh, well, I have a friend coming over and we both like pizza and I want to show him this new pizza place, right? Um, these are not the kinds of explanations we can demand of merely physical phenomena, right? Why did the rock roll down the hill? Did the rock want to roll down the hill? Well, no. Rocks don't have wants, right? Um, we can explain all of that, just via a physical causal chain. But if you ask somebody, why did you throw the rock down the hill? They could give an answer. They could say, I just wanted to see how it rolled. Or, my friend and I were trying to make a game out of it. Or, I was trying to hit that tree down at the bottom of the hill with the rock, right? So to continue, um, since what we do almost always involves movements of our limbs and other bodily parts, this means that agency, at least human agency, presupposes the possibility of mental to physical causation. Somehow your beliefs and desires cause your limbs to move in appropriate ways so that in 10 seconds you find your whole body made up of untold billions of molecules and weighing over 100 pounds displaced from your bedroom to the kitchen. Um, I guess in this case, we're talking about getting up and getting something from the kitchen. A world in which mental causation does not exist is one in which there are no agents and no actions. All right. So I think we can straightforwardly see the importance of mental causation when it comes to agency. Let's expand our discussion and talk a little bit about mental realism and epiphenomenalism. And we'll start with perception. So, pretty uncontroversial claim. Perceptions cause mental events. They could cause beliefs and desires. Indeed, some would say that perceptions are mental events themselves. Maybe sensations are the sensory events that lead to perceptions. I tend to think of perceptions and sensations as quite different. Sensation, for me, and for other thinkers like myself, sensation is a little more rudimentary. We're talking about detecting differences between light and dark, hot and cold, solid versus liquid, detecting the shape of something, right? Perception is conceptual. So if I'm sensing this cup, right, I've got this cup shaped thing. It's got certain properties like it's solid, it's shiny, it's a little bit warm from the coffee in it. A full blown perception is when I'm able to say, oh, that's a coffee cup. So that's what I mean when I say that perception is conceptual. Perception is like, um, most of the time anyway, the sort of thing that happens when you're sensing and then categorizing an object. But anyway, we don't have to get hung up on that. The point is that these physical events in the world cause mental events, perceptions, beliefs, desires, etc. And it follows that without mental causation, there could be no knowledge. Without the physical affecting the mental via my sensory systems, there could be no knowledge. Uh, in the bare sense, right? There could be no knowledge of things like what's out there, where it is, and what it's doing. But there's another way in which there would be no knowledge. There would be no scientific knowledge. We don't just perceive the world, right? That's a start. We also do experiments in the folk sense and the scientific sense. Like think of rolling the rock down the hill because you wanted to see how it rolls, or to see whether you could hit the tree at the bottom of the hill, right? Um, that's a sort of folk sense or a scientific sense. We want to answer a question about the world, um, and that starts with observation. But that all from there, there's a sort of experimental manipulation of the world, where we look at the world and see what happens under various conditions. We'll have our control condition where we don't intervene, and then some experimental conditions where we offer some sort of experimental intervention, and then we look at the difference and what happened, and come to understand the world a little bit better, come to understand how the world works by doing that. Um, and this also presupposes mental causation, right? You have to want to know. Um, you have to want to know how things work. Um, uh, in order to do an experiment. What's a simple experiment that I don't know, maybe we might have done when we were kids? Could be part of a science class. I used to have these little books with like little science experiments you can do at home. Maybe one of you baking soda volcano. Oh, sure, yeah. So what happens when an acid and a base combine? Even if the book tells you, you got a book that tells you how to make a baking soda volcano. Okay, the baking soda and the vinegar combine, you got an acid and a base. And when they combine, they react and they release. What do they release? I know, we know. Carbon dioxide, right? So even if the book tells you that, you might want to see it for yourself. So you go into the pantry and get some baking soda and vinegar, and then you make like a paper mache volcano, and then boom, you cause a chemical reaction with combining baking soda and vinegar. One thing that I did when I was young, I saw this on Bill Nye the Science Guy. I made a baking soda and vinegar fire extinguisher, which was kind of cool. It was just like a bottle with a straw coming out the top. Um, and the bottle had vinegar, and then you had like a little cap suspended in the bottle with the baking soda. And to activate it, you'd simply shake it up. And then the baking soda would react with the vinegar and produce carbon dioxide, which would shoot out of a little straw in the cap. And you could put out a small fire with it. Not a big fire, obviously, but it just illustrated the principle of chemical reactions between acids and bases. Or, dissolving salt in water, right? You put the salt in the water and mix it up. It's like it disappears. Did it really disappear? Well, you can check by putting the water out to evaporate. Um, and then when you come back after all the water's evaporated, you see the salt is still there, right? So, um, mental causation is important in this. You have to wonder what will happen if I mix baking soda and vinegar, or if I dissolve salt in water. What happens? Well, we can find out, right, by doing these little experiments. That's how science works. And we must conclude then, Kim says, that if minds were not able to causally connect with physical events and processes, we could have neither the practical knowledge required to inform our decisions and actions, nor the theoretical knowledge that gives us an understanding of the world around us. So, pretty important. We know so far, um, physical to mental causation is important in terms of perception. Experimentation requires perception, physical to mental, but also mental to physical. But of course, we can also have mental to mental causation. Mental states and their interactions with other mental states play a really important role in knowledge. So, this is the example Kim gives us. Suppose someone asks you, is the number of planets odd or even? Well, let's not read the rest. Let's just get to it. Is the number of planets in our solar system, I'll specify the number of planets in our solar system, an odd or an even number? We are not including Pluto. I can't believe, oh, every time I do this, there are still people that are like, Pluto's a planet. Yeah, see, Shannon, I'm not answering. Okay. Let's allow Pluto to be a planet. It's not. Um, I will die on this hill. Exactly. Pluto has a moon called Charon, which is nearly the same size as Pluto. Um, Pluto also hasn't cleared out its orbit around the sun. It's another reason why we don't consider it a planet. But say you did consider it a planet, you would answer nine. And then you would say, okay, well, nine is not divisible by two. Therefore, the number of planets is odd. Or maybe you're like me and you discount Pluto as a planet. Say, okay, the number of planets odd or even. Well, there's 8 planets. Oh, you meant even. That's fine, Matthew. Yeah. So you count out the planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Okay, that's 8 planets. That's divisible by two. So there's an even number of planets. Okay. So what we've done there, whether you think of Pluto as a planet or not, is you've drawn an inference. I ask you, number of planets, odd or even? Well, you take your number of planets, 8 or 9, depending on whether you're a Pluto defender or not, and then you infer, okay, well, 9 is not divisible by 2, so odd. 8 divisible by 2, even. So, um, A lot of the beliefs we hold are inferred from other beliefs. And I should also add that knowledge is a special type of belief. We can think of knowledge as a well-justified true belief. So, um, I know that Ottawa is the capital city of Canada. Um, what do I have to have in order to have that bit of knowledge? I have to have a belief, my belief that Ottawa is the capital city of Canada. That belief has to be true, and it just so happens to be true. And I have to have good reasons for holding the belief. Um, I learned it in school. Whenever I head into Ottawa, I see the signs, "Welcome to our national capital." I can go and see the Parliament buildings, right? I probably will. I'm heading back to Ottawa shortly. Uh, I can go walk by the Parliament building. Yep, there they are. We have those in the capital. They're not in Toronto. They're not in Montreal. They're not in Vancouver. The Parliament buildings where the government sits are here. So I have good reasons for believing that Ottawa is the capital, and Ottawa is the capital. So I know that Ottawa is the capital. But other beliefs are inferred from beliefs we already hold. Like, for example, your belief that the number of planets is odd or even. Or even if you have, let's go with the Pluto example. Like, if I ask you, is Pluto a planet? And you say yes, maybe you're making an inference based on something else you believe. What do you think? For those who are Pluto supporters, why do you say that Pluto is a planet? And it might not even be an inference, right? You might just have a soft spot for Pluto. Perhaps you learned all the names of the planets when you were young. And maybe it's just hard to let go of Pluto being a planet, right? Oh, that's it. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, look, when I was young, Pluto, separation anxiety, yes. Well, when I was young, Pluto was a planet. Like it was 100% considered a planet. And then they said, well, it's not a planet anymore. It's a dwarf planet. And I admit, at first, I was like, wait a minute, they can't do that. But then I had taken an astronomy class in university, and I thought, well, actually, you know, um, there's lots of other um, little dwarf planets out there beyond Pluto that are about the same size. Some are even larger, and we don't call them planets. There's like Ceres, like the asteroid, or Ceres was formerly an asteroid. Now it's a dwarf planet. It's so big that it's round. It's got so much mass that its gravity has actually made it into a sphere. Um, and so I thought, like, okay, I guess I'm okay with Pluto not being a planet anymore. Um, which I kind of got there eventually. Um, from acquiring new beliefs. Um, Arshia says, "Isn't it dangerous to an extent to believe in well-justified reasonable beliefs? Because there are well-justified reasonable beliefs we can't exactly prove if people who believe it enough believe it's reasonable." Or maybe this is unrelated. Well, no, I think it's good to bring up. I think that so when I say reasonable or rational or well justified beliefs, I mean we need a standard of evidence. So it can't just be like the person feels like they're being really reasonable. Um, I know I'm always picking on the flat earthers, right? But the flat earth people think that they have good reasons for what they believe. But they don't, right? Um, they their beliefs don't meet the standards of evidence that's actually required. like what we would call justification conditions. So they might seem reasonable, well justified beliefs to them, um, but to a philosopher, well, a philosopher like me would say you actually don't have very good reasons for holding those beliefs. Um, a flat earther might, well, I don't know. They say all kinds of crazy stuff. Um, what's some of those crazy things that flat earthers say? Somebody give me an example. I know. I was because of the Artemis 2 mission. Who was watching that, by the way? Artemis 2. Were you guys watching that? I hope you were, because that was so cool. Adrian, yes, please somebody tell me and Adrian aren't the only ones. Okay, good. So, first trip back to the moon, right? Really cool. Going around the moon. Um, some flat Earth people thought it was all fake, right? Because space isn't real. And they would make all kinds of claims like, well, it was faked. It's filmed in a Hollywood studio, and the rocket isn't real. The moon isn't real, right? The reasons they have for holding those beliefs are not good reasons. They often lean into conspiracy theory territory, which is like, in terms of like epistemic justification or the scientific method, they always get it backwards. Um, so I don't know if that answers your question, but uh, people who hold false beliefs, um, who think that those beliefs are well justified, it might seem that way to them, but they don't have actual well justified on a sort of on an appropriate standard of epistemic justification. They don't actually have well justified beliefs. Then again, this is not an epistemology class. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but I hope I've answered your question, Arshia. And you also said, I heard a flat earther suggest that the world map is fake. Okay. That the reason no one is, and that's the reason no one has fallen off yet. It's interesting because the average person wouldn't know what the world actually looks like. I mean, that's interesting. Um, yeah, they do say all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah. First time I've heard that too. All right, let's get back to epiphenomenalism. As I said before, epiphenomenalism is the view that mental states are caused by physical events, or mental states or mental events are caused by physical events. So, the light from the world that's reflecting off all the surfaces in my environment uh, goes into my eye, goes through my pupil, affects the photoreceptors in my retina, sends signals down my optic nerves. Um, and eventually, after a whole bunch of really complicated physical events in the brain, I get a visual perception of, for example, the coffee cup. But on epiphenomenalism, mental events cannot cause physical events. So, on this specific version of epiphenomenalism that we're looking at, physical events can cause mental events, but mental events cannot cause physical events. Usually, we attribute this to T.H. Huxley, Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, a 19th century naturalist. Huxley's an interesting guy. He's known as Darwin's bulldog because he was a vigorous defender of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. He was also one of the first people to point out that dinosaurs, or well, that birds are descendants of dinosaurs. Of course, now um, we regard birds as dinosaurs. There's another interesting science thing that's happened, right? When I was a kid, Pluto was a planet. Now it's a dwarf planet. When I was a kid, birds were descendants of dinosaurs. Now, no, birds are dinosaurs, which is pretty cool. Um, So Huxley was one of the first people to point that out. I heard from my paleontologist friend. I have a friend who's a paleontologist. We got together recently to catch up. And he was telling me, and this is probably an apocryphal story, but he was telling me that Huxley may have made this connection when he was carving like a Christmas goose. And he thought to himself, like, "Oh, I've seen this before." Kind of put two and two together and worked out that birds as we know them today evolved from dinosaurs. And he had some interesting things to say about animal consciousness. Here's one of the things he says in his lecture, which I've made available to you, which is entitled On the Hypothesis that Animals Are Automata and Its History. Huxley wrote, "The consciousness of brutes, that is, animals, would appear to be related to the mechanism of the body, of their body, simply as a collateral product of its working, and to be as completely without any power of modifying that working as the steam whistle which accompanies the work of a locomotive engine is without influence upon its machinery. Their volition, if they have any, is an emotion indicative of physical changes, not a cause of such changes." So what Huxley is saying here is that when it comes to animals, they might have certain sensations, perhaps even mental states, like beliefs and desires, but these are not the cause of their actions. They might represent to the organism that, such and such an action is happening, but they don't play a causal role. Rather like the steam whistle on a locomotive, a train powered by a steam engine. The engine generates the steam, which moves the locomotive. Some of that steam can be diverted so that the engineer can blow a whistle. But the blowing of the whistle has no effect on the machinery of the locomotive. It's an epiphenomenon. And Huxley is drawing on the latest biological and physiological research of his day, right? There were animals like frogs, for example, that were being experimented on, where large portions of their brain would be removed while the frogs are still alive, such that the frogs should not really be conscious of anything, and yet they would still engage in these automatic behaviors. So if you took one of these like lobotomized frogs and put it in water, it would swim. Even though presumably it didn't have the parts of the brain necessary for perceiving its environment. And there were people like this too. Huxley mentions cases of people who have suffered like catastrophic brain injury. I think he talks about one guy who's got basically his entire frontal lobe just decimated by a bullet to the head. And unlike Phineas Gage, who survived, albeit with a changed personality, this individual appeared to not really be all that conscious, at least not like you or I. Couldn't hold a conversation with him. But he could still do things like avoid obstacles in a room that he was walking around in. So this is the sort of thing Huxley's drawing from. Um, he continues, "It is quite true that, to the best of my judgment, the argumentation which applies to brutes holds equally good of men, and therefore that all states of consciousness in us, as in them, are immediately caused by molecular changes of the brain substance. It seems to me that in men, as in brutes, there is no proof that any state of consciousness is the cause of change in the motion of the matter of the organism." And he concluded that we are conscious automata. We are like conscious robots. Um, I'm curious, what do you make of this? And do you see any interesting similarities or differences with some of the other thinkers that we've talked about? Firstly, what do you think of the prospect that you are just a conscious automaton, where you're conscious, sure, but your conscious mental states are merely indicative or representative of changes within your organism rather than the cause of changes in your organism? What do you think? Timothy, go ahead.
So that means I can't be blamed for getting a bad grade, right?
Hmm. Well, you're right, and that's actually that connects this back with agency, right? If
Yeah.
you get a bad grade and you're an agent, and mental causation is a real thing, then you can be held responsible for your actions, right? You can say, "Oh, I got a bad grade.
Yeah.
Um, Why'd you get a bad grade? I didn't study. I didn't do any of the work. I screwed up. Ah, it's my fault, right? You are morally responsible, or at least academic. I don't know if it's morally wrong to get a bad grade, but you are academically responsible, we can say,
Yeah.
right? But if you're an automaton, I can't hold you responsible for anything because you're not an agent.
Yeah. I wouldn't be in control then. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like, you know, committing a crime versus of your own volition versus being coerced into committing a crime. So
Hmm.
let's say I rob a bank, right? Give me all your money, because I just want the money. Well, I'm pretty responsible in that case. I think a judge would come down pretty hard on me in terms of my sentence. But what if I rob a bank because I've been coerced into robbing a bank, right? Some big crime lord says, if you don't rob the bank and give me the money, I'll kill your family. Well, I'm still probably going to get in a bit of trouble for robbing the bank, but not as much
Right.
as if I just decide, give me all that money. I want your money, right?
Mhm. And
Or, sorry, Timothy, did you want to add something?
yeah, I was gonna say it's sort of like free will and determinism, right? Like the
It is related to that, yeah. And Kim doesn't discuss it in those terms, but
Mhm.
this
Yeah, I'm
is
sure.
very, very much what he's talking about.
Yeah, that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah. There's another interesting case. I don't remember the name of the case, but it actually happened in Canada. And there was a man who got along very well, I think, with his in-laws. But he suffered from severe parasomnia, so sleep disorders. And he would sleepwalk. And one day he got up. It was an episode of somnambulism. He was sleepwalking. He got up, got out of bed, got in the car, drove to the in-laws, killed one of them, and severely injured the other one. And he was found not criminally responsible because he was sleepwalking when he did it, and then they were able to prove to the court that he had this medical condition and that he was not aware of his actions. In that case, if that was true, and if this is what the court found, and this is what actually happened, then yeah, this man was not acting agentively because he was sleepwalking. So, an interesting here's the similarity I was hoping to hear about. Huxley and Descartes both think of humans and animals as automata, at least the body. But Descartes says that humans have the res cogitans, the thinking substance. We are thinking things. Animals don't have this. Animals are simply beast machines. Think back to our discussion of the Turing test also, and the difference between Turing and Descartes, right? Descartes was confident in his claim that no animal could ever hold a conversation because they are just machines. Likewise, no thinking machine could ever actually be said to think or to reason or to hold a conversation because they only act from the dispositions of their organs. You need the thinking substance, the soul, for that. Huxley is saying, no, 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 no. Humans and animals are machines. Humans and many animals are conscious. They have mentality. But for animals as well as humans, our mental states, our consciousness, is merely indicative of changes in the organism, not the cause of changes. So it's kind of nice because unlike Descartes, who said animals have no minds, Huxley says, no, animals have minds and so do we, but our minds don't really do any causal work. Um, So it's kind of cool, but also kind of spooky at the same time, I suppose. How should we respond to epiphenomenalism? This is what Samuel Alexander, an emergentist philosopher from the 20th century, the early 20th century, had to say. He said, epiphenomenalism supposes something to exist in nature which has nothing to do, no purpose to serve, a species of noblesse which depends upon the work of its inferiors, but is kept for show and might as well and undoubtedly would in time be abolished. Uh, like like some kind of lord or lady or king or queen, a species of noblesse who doesn't do any work and just depends on the work of its inferiors, right? That's what an epiphenomenon would be like or is like. This is Kim's exegesis of this little quote. Kim says Alexander is saying that if epiphenomenalism is true, the mind has no work to do and hence is entirely useless, and it is pointless to recognize it as something real. Our beliefs and desires would have no role in causing our decisions and actions, and would be entirely useless in their explanations. That is, mental states would be useless in terms of explaining our actions. Our perception and knowledge would have nothing to do with our artistic creations or technological inventions. Being real and having causal powers go hand in hand. To deprive the mind of causal potency is in effect to deprive it of its reality. Um, so this is mental realism, right? The epiphenomenalism is like the opposite of mental realism. Mental realism says that mental states are real in the sense that they have causal work to do. And epiphenomenalism says that they are all effect, no cause. Now, not many people argue that mentality or minds aren't real on the basis of epiphenomenalism, which we could call like a strong epiphenomenalism. In fact, many philosophers and cognitive scientists say that mental causation is a desideratum, something that we desire to save or explain, something we want to keep. Jerry Fodor, the philosopher and cognitive scientist, said this. He said, I'm not really convinced that it matters very much whether the mental is physical. Still less that it matters very much whether we can prove that it is. Whereas if it isn't literally true that my wanting is causally responsible for my reaching, and my itching is causally responsible for my scratching, and my believing is causally responsible for my saying, if none of that is literally true, then practically everything I believe about anything is false and it's the end of the world. I mean, Fodor has an interesting way of putting it, but I agree. Like, if I am not an agent, if my mental states don't have causal powers, everything I believe is wrong and it's the end of the world. I can't be held responsible for anything morally or causally. I can't be said to have discovered anything. I'm not an agent. I'm just a conscious automaton. Um, so for Fodor and for a lot of other philosophers and cognitive scientists, mental causation is non-negotiable. Like we need to show that we've got it because the alternative is bleak. It's very bleak. What do you think? Are you worried as I am, as Fodor was? Because remember what this entails. If epiphenomenalism is true, or if we accept epiphenomenalism, if we decide, okay, sure, I'm going to be an epiphenomenalist, we'd have to, at least it seems, abandon our conception of ourselves as agents. Now, just can you even do that? Even if I tell you epiphenomenalism is true, hard determinism is true, you have no agency, no free will, and then I say, go on and live your life, you still wouldn't really conceive of yourself as an automaton in your day to day existence. That's how important this notion of agency and the notion of freedom of the will is. So, are you worried? I'm worried. I don't want epiphenomenalism to be true. Some people don't seem too worried. Some people are like, yeah, I don't believe in free will, man. I'm a hard determinist, man. Um, which is fine, I guess. But I think it's it's a bummer to look at your life that way. And by the way, we can have free will even if we do live in a deterministic universe, okay? That's called compatibilism. That is not a problem, even if the universe is deterministic. And again, I know this is not like a metaphysics class, so I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but you can still have free will in a deterministic universe. There's no need to be like, I give up. I guess I'll just be an epiphenomenalist now. Oh, it was the first. So Arshia, it was the first time you've heard about this possibility. So I'd be extra curious to know what you. Oh no, no, you're talking about the flat Earth. Sorry. Shannon says I'm not worried because, oops, because I couldn't change anything if it were true. Yeah, okay. So that's almost like that's a position that we call fatalism, which I guess is similar to determinism. But fatalism is kind of like, whatever happens, happens. I can't control it, so I won't worry about it. That's fatalism, which I suppose has a place, right? There are things that you can't do anything about. Um, except maybe how you react to them. I'll spell it like this. So, yeah. And then, you can be a determinist, but not a fatalist. You could be a fatalist, but not a determinist, right? You might say, like, okay, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and I can't control it. But what I can, you still can control something, and that is how you react to what's happening, right? Or, yeah, like you say there, Shannon. Shannon says, I'm not worried about it because worrying about it does me no good. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I still remember each of my thesis defenses, right? Which went fine. Um, but when you do your a thesis defense, this was the case when I did my master's defense and my PhD defense. You go in, you're there before your committee. Remember, in a viva voce style thing, you spend a few minutes kind of explaining your project and what it was all about. Everybody's read it, so you don't have to say too much about it. And then they ask you questions. That's the viva voce. That's like the Turing test to see whether you actually know your stuff or not. And then they kick you out. And then they deliberate. And I still remember being outside of the room waiting, like, oh, really nervous. I was so anxious. But of course I had to say to myself, like, look, whatever happens, happens, right? It's you've done the best you can, and now it's out of your hands and it's in the committee's hands. Luckily, it both times was fine. Um, but yeah, if whenever we get anxiety about something that we can't control, maybe you want to remind yourself that hey, it's okay, you can't control it. Things are going to be okay, right? But um, I am worried about epiphenomenalism. I don't want that to be the case. Arshia says I wouldn't be able to accept that it would be true for every situation. I think. I feel like we have on-off switches, automatons with conditional consciousness. Yeah, okay, so what you say there reminds me of something that I didn't want to forget. So this is physical to mental causation right here. What you reminded me of there, Arshia, is that I think what Huxley's research and subsequent research has shown is that a heck of a lot of what's going on in here, or even what's going on from here to here, is automatic. But that doesn't mean that consciousness has no role to play. Um, think about it. From ironically, Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, did not consider the evolutionary or possible evolutionary reasons for why we are conscious. Um, and the received view is that we have consciousness for slow, deliberative thinking. So a lot of stuff we can automatize. We can practice it and it becomes like automatic. But eventually we're going to run into something out there in the world that that we haven't seen before. Um, or we're going to run into a problem that we don't know how to solve yet. And that's what that slow, deliberative, conscious thinking is for. So that's one evolutionary reason why we might have consciousness. So again, like Alexander, right, said we if we're epiphenomenalists, we'd be supposing that there's something in nature with no work to do, and that just seems weird. It seems weird to me. Maybe we should take a quick break before we get to anomalous monism. What do you think? Because anomalous monism is tricky. Yeah. Okay, I have 340 on my stove. Yeah, yeah. Like, well, um, uh, ravens, New Caledonian crows. Yeah, yeah. Timothy?
Yeah, I have a quick question. It's related to the essay proposal.
Okay.
It's very quick. Like, so I want to write about like personal identity, sort of, and it is listed in the core syllabus, like as one of the in the description section, but it's not explicitly mentioned as one of the topics we are cover the main topics we're covering in class.
So
So that's still
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah. You can write about that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make
Um,
sure I didn't like
yeah, no, no, that's
go
fine.
completely off course. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. So I have, well, what time do I have on my laptop actually? Maybe that's what I should look at. Um, let's get out of here. How do I do that? Gotta find the right button. 341. Okay, let's come back at that'll be 356. 356 we'll come back. Okay. I will see you all in about 15 minutes. Resume. Okay, so we're back. I'll just share my screen, pick up where we left off. Okay, now we get to the tricky bit, anomalous monism, um, which is kind of a, well, it, as I said, it's tricky. Um, so anomalous monism is basically like substance physicalism, where there are no, uh, let's say, causal laws for the mental. Yet, the mental still has causal powers. Um, so, the problems that we've just been covering with mental causation could be put like this, as Kim does on 202, 203. How is it possible for a mental event, such as a pain or a thought, to cause a physical event, a limb withdrawal, an utterance? Or in terms of properties, how is it possible for an instantiation of a mental property, for example, that of experiencing pain, to cause a physical property to be instantiated? Um, this is still a problem, even though we've done away with substance dualism, right? Substance dualism actually, one can argue, introduces the mind-body interaction problem. It's not the first, I guess it's not the first introduction of this problem, but it is a problem with Descartes' theory specifically. But it's also a problem that remains with us to this day, even though we've dispensed, or most of us have dispensed with substance dualism. Um, the problem is, right? The problem remains. The interaction problem remains. So, um, compare, for example, with our talk of other kinds of physical causation, between different domains, like, physical in the sense of physics, chemistry, and biology. We don't have any problem talking about how chemical events can cause biological events. Um, for example, um, I can take a medication which might raise or lower my heart rate. Just simple example. We got no problem with that. No problem when it comes to, sort of cross-level causation between the chemical and the physical. We don't even have a problem talking about sort of higher order stuff like political events causing economic events, right? Political event. I don't know. Donald Trump gets elected. Subsequent political event. He starts putting tariffs on everybody, which causes economic events to happen, like I don't know, decreased trade with the United States and increased trade with Europe, just for example. No problem with all of that. So why is talk of mental causation a problem? Might be because of some assumptions that we're bringing to the table here, and we're going to look at some of those assumptions now. One issue is the assumption that there must be laws that connect mental phenomena with physical phenomena, what we'll call psychophysical laws. So, this is what Davidson's anomalous monism is targeting. He's questioning and trying to show, he's questioning whether there can be such laws and trying to show that there need not be such laws. So think back to identity theory, mind-brain identity theory, right? We learned about how the identity theorists like Smart identified mental states with physical states. This whole theory presupposes that there are law-like connections between physical states like your C fiber activation and mental states like pain. Functionalism does this too. Functionalism says that realizers realize mental states in law-like ways. So if you want to go make it a little bit more elementary and go back to the calculator example, the various realizers of calculators, be they hardware or software, realize these arithmetic, I don't want to say functions because functions is a technical term in mathematics, but they realize these arithmetic operations in law-like ways. But what Davidson is concerned with specifically are propositional attitudes. He's not concerned with perceptions or sensations like pain, right? There might be law-like relations that we can talk about between, if we want to go the identity theory route, between C fiber activation and pain. There might be law-like relations between pain realizers like C fibers in humans or O fibers in octopi and pain in humans or in the octopus, right? Davidson's not talking about that. He's talking about propositional attitudes. So things like beliefs and desires. Davidson thinks there's an absence of psychophysical laws when it comes to intentional states like this and the roles that they play in our behavior. It's easy to identify neural correlates of pain or color perception and the rest. That's fine. But it's not obvious to Davidson that the same thing should be true for beliefs and desires. Maybe there are laws, but they'd be very complicated, very hard to figure out. And if you want to get a picture of why, think back to when we were talking about identity theory and we talked about the defeasibility of mental behavioral entailments. Right? Or actually, that was behaviorism. We were talking about behaviorism. The defeasibility of mental physical entailments is one of the reasons why we can't really get rid of mental states on behaviorism. You guys remember this, right? You can say like, okay, maybe X believes X is going to do this. Well, there's always another reason why X might not do that, right? Remember the example of opening the window. It's hot. Mary decides to cool the place down. She opens the window. Okay, but that's defeasible because she might then consider, wait, if I open the window, the noise of the construction across the street will come in and wake up my grandma who's napping over there. So even though it's hot, she doesn't open the window, right? just to show you how complicated this all is. Now we talked about that in the context of behaviorism, but here we're talking about it as a means of illustrating just how complicated this all is. And so if there are such laws, it would be very, very difficult to figure them out. All right. So here's Davidson's argument. One really important premise in this argument is, quote, the ascription of intentional states like beliefs and desires is regulated by certain principles of rationality that ensure that the total set of such states attributed to a person will be as rational and as coherent as possible. Like I've said in the third point, you can think of rationality and coherence as constitutive of the mental. They're what make the mental mental for Davidson. Indeed, for Davidson, this is this is the mark of the mental, rationality and coherence. And when we attribute beliefs and other intentional states to people, we apply this principle such that we attribute to a subject beliefs that are obvious logical consequences of beliefs that we've already attributed to the person. Again, this is intentional states, not perceptions or sensations. Um, so rationality and coherence are constitutive of the mental. Think about it. Um, we operate like this with other people. We assume that other people are rational and that their beliefs are coherent in the sense that whatever new beliefs we attribute to them must um, follow from beliefs they already hold. Like if, to use the example that we've kind of been running with over the course of this class, if you hear your roommate listening to the radio, and it's sunny out, she's listening to the radio or checking her weather app, and then you see her leave with an umbrella, you can attribute the belief to her that it's going to rain. You can say, "Oh, my roommate must believe it's going to rain later, and she desires not to get rained on. That's why she brought her umbrella." This might be defeasible. You say, "Oh, maybe she doesn't believe it's going to rain, but she brought the umbrella in case it's too sunny and she wants to use it as a parasol," right? That's fine. But what we don't do is attribute beliefs to her that are not rational and are not coherent with the beliefs we've already attributed to her. We don't say, "Oh, okay, she was just checking the Weather Network app. She's bringing the umbrella. It's sunny now. She must be bringing the umbrella to protect against a meteorite that might strike her while she's out and about." No, we don't do that, right? Because that's not as rational and doesn't cohere as well with her other beliefs. So this is constitutive of the sort of mental states that Davidson has in mind. And here's where the issue arises. In the physical domain, there's no there's no requirement of rationality or coherence. And the physical domain is where we find these law-like relations, these causal nomological relations, we could call them. This is how Kim puts it. He says on 205, 206, suppose now that we have laws connecting beliefs with brain states between the mental and the physical. In particular, suppose we have laws that specify a neural substrate for each of our beliefs. A series of laws of the form N occurs to a person at T if and only if B occurs to that person at T, where N is a neural state and B is a belief. If such laws were available, we could attribute beliefs to a subject one by one, independently of the constraints of the rationality principle. Again, that's where we attribute beliefs that are rational and coherent. For in order to determine whether she has a certain belief B, all we would need to do is ascertain whether B's neural substrate N is present in her. There would be no need to check whether this belief makes sense in the context of her other beliefs or even what other beliefs she has. In short, we could read her mind by reading her brain. By being connected by law with neural state N, belief B becomes hostage to the constraints of physical theory. So, by assuming that there are these psychophysical laws, law-like relations between mental states, the B's, and the neural states, the N's, we can dispense with the principle of rationality. All we would have to do is put you in some fancy brain scanning machine, and we could read the mind by reading the brain. I could look at this particular bundle of neurons and see how they're all wired up together, what their patterns of activations are, and I could see, oh, my roommate believes it's going to rain today. So, what are the consequences of all of this? It follows from the psychophysical anomalism. Remember, anomalism here means like an absence of laws. This is his anomalous monism, that there cannot be causal relations between the mental and the physical. But now you're thinking, hold on, I thought you said Davidson believes that mental states can sometimes cause physical states. Well, how does that work? Well, Davidson can dispute the inference from the premise that causation requires laws to the conclusion that psychophysical causation requires psychophysical laws. So, in a nutshell, what anomalous monism says is that the mental can sometimes causally affect the physical, even though there are no psychophysical laws. So, what if we try this? This is what Kim does on 207. If mental event M causes physical event P, kind C and E, under which M and P respectively fall, and which are connected by law, must both be physical kinds. So M, which is under kind C, causes event P, which is under kind E. These two kinds must be physical kinds, connected by physical laws, not psychophysical laws. And it would follow that M, the mental event, is just a physical event. And that is anomalous monism. And Davidson would say that it applies to all mental events that are causally connected to physical events. Questions? Did I go too fast? Or maybe I should say, who's like, what right now, right? Who's
Yeah,
like not
at the
quite
end,
did,
yeah, at the end was a little fast.
okay, so what part shall I reiterate?
Like I think the you had me up to the middle point, and then the last part I was like couldn't really
So
keep up.
so like here, say.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so if there's a mental event that causes a physical event, so let's say my mental event is a desire for a cup of tea, and the
Mhm.
physical event is getting up and putting the kettle on. The mental event falls under a kind of event, kind C, and the physical event under another kind of event, E, which are both physical kinds of events. So this is just saying if these are connected by law, they must both be physical kinds. So
Mhm.
M, the mental event, is just a physical event. That's where we are so far.
Right. Huh. Okay.
Maybe it'll make sense if we keep going.
Okay, they're just equating mental events to like they're categorizing that as the physical event. That like the
Well, we'll see.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
No
let's
problem.
carry on. To continue. On anomalous monism, Kim writes, to say that a mental event, M, is a cause of an event, P may be mental or physical, amounts only to this. M has a physical property Q, or falls under a physical kind Q, such that an appropriate law connects Q, or events with property Q, with some physical property P of lowercase p. Um, so, like Matthew says, mental events that cause physical events are physical. In a nutshell, that's how I understand this. I admit this is tricky for me as well. Because you got to remember, I'm much more of a a cognitive science sort of philosopher than I am like a pure philosophy philosopher. But anomalous monism says that a mental event has some physical property, or falls under such and such a physical kind, such that there is a law that connects the physical side of things, the physical to the physical, not the mental to the physical. That's where the laws are. The laws are physical to physical, not mental to physical. So it looks kind of like these mental states here, their properties, what kinds they fall under, don't have any causal work to do. This is like a mental state epiphenomenalism. Now, most philosophers nowadays are not dualists. We've dispensed with mental substances. Must we also dispense with mental properties? Here's the problem. The challenge, Kim says, posed by Davidson's psychophysical anomalism is to answer the following question. How can anomalous mental properties, properties that are not fit for laws, be causally efficacious properties? Well, we could just reject all of this. We could say, okay, to heck with anomalous monism. Or we could try to show that there's some alternative on which anomalous mental properties can be causally efficacious, where we don't appeal to laws. So let's see if we can do that. Before we do so, questions. Because now we're going to get into some funky counterfactual reasoning. So a state is just like the state that something's in. I could say that I'm in a state of pain if like I'm in pain if I feel pain. That's the mental state. The physical state might be tissue damage and C fiber activation. Properties are what we predicate to things. So if I have the property of being in pain, right? I'm in pain. You can predicate that property to me. You can say Josh is in pain. It's really just, I think what Kim is doing here is just covering his bases. Some people like to think in terms of events and states, and some people like to think in terms of properties. Kim is covering all the bases here. So whether you're like a property person or an event state sort of person, you're covered. Make sense? So now what we want to do is try and see whether there's a way that mental states can causally affect physical states, or whether mental properties can affect changes in physical properties on a like a non-nomological approach. And one way we might be able to do this is counterfactual reasoning. These are counterfactual. What are counterfactuals? Counterfactuals are like what if statements. Counterfactuals are statements that refer to things, to refer to how things might have otherwise been, not how they are now. For example, I am drinking coffee right now, but I might have been drinking tea. So a statement like Josh is drinking coffee is true, but the counterfactual statement, Josh is drinking tea, could have been true. So what would a counterfactual account of causation look like? Well, it would look like this. To say that event X caused event Y is to say that had X not occurred, Y would not have occurred. So this is really all about like what could have been the case. And we sort of cache this version of causation by saying that the reason this happened is because this other thing happened. And if this other thing had not happened, this thing wouldn't have happened. Like yesterday, I went fishing, okay? I went over, there's a little lake over there. I went fishing. I caught some fish. So, event X, Josh caught some fish. Now, or event Y, Josh caught some fish. Why? Because he went fishing. If Josh had not gone fishing, he would not have caught fish. And that's the way we make sense of causation on a counterfactual approach. Well, that's good, Matt. I would actually say, well, I could be holding something else in the cup, like tea. I would say, had I not been holding a cup, I could not have been drinking the coffee. See, I need to hold the cup to drink the coffee. I guess I could get a straw, or I could put it down here and just like try and take a sip like one of those drinking birds. Um, but to drink the coffee, I have to pick up the cup. If I don't pick up the cup, I don't drink the coffee. So, counterfactual account of causation. Kim says, we know that mental events, in virtue of their mental properties, can and sometimes do cause physical events because we can and sometimes do know appropriate mental physical counterfactuals to be true. Mental causation is possible because such counterfactuals are sometimes true. Now, in order to check whether this works, we need to see that we need to check whether there are some problems with these counterfactuals. Can we do that? There's two approaches. One is the nomic derivational approach, and the other is the possible worlds approach. So again, nomic from nomos, law. Try to derive law from counterfactual reasoning. Kim says, on the nomic derivational approach, the counterfactual conditional, if P were the case, Q would be the case, where P and Q are propositions. They're sentences about the world that could be true or false, is true just in case the consequent Q of the conditional can be logically derived from its antecedent P, when taken together with laws and statements of conditions holding on the occasion. Can we try and come up with some examples? Remember, P and Q are meant to be propositions, so they can be statements about the world. So I basically need some statements about the world from you guys where we can show that the consequent Q is true because it can be logically derived from the antecedent P. Can we come up with some examples? Well, a simple example might be something like um, if Josh were hungry, he would order the pizza. I mean, it's trouble logically deriving that. Tricky logically deriving that. I don't have to order pizza. There's nothing necessary about ordering pizza versus ordering burgers. But you get the idea. The challenge here is that we would be trying to derive physical consequence from mental antecedents. So, um, we'd be trying to derive mental physical laws, psychophysical laws. We'd be right back where we started. I really, maybe we can come up with some more examples, though. I'm not satisfied with that example. It might become clear when we look at the possible worlds approach, but I don't know. I guess we could be like, if Josh were hot, he would turn on the air conditioner. So if Josh were feeling too warm, then it would be the case that he'd get up and turn on the air conditioner. And here, what we're trying to show is that we can logically derive the physical occurrence, um, the physical consequent from the mental antecedent. But you can see how this would require those pesky psychophysical laws, which on anomalous monism don't exist. So you can see how we're back to square one. I take it. Yes? So maybe we can use the possible worlds approach. So here, as Kim says on 211, the counterfactual, if P were the case, Q would be the case, is true just in case Q is true in the world in which P is true, and that apart from P's being true there, is as much like the actual world as possible. So we're talking possible worlds, not like Rick and Morty multiverse kind of possible worlds, but logically possible worlds where something else might have been the case. Because remember, we're evaluating counterfactuals. So let's say P is false in this world, therefore Q is false. But there could be a possible world or a P world where P is true and therefore Q is true. So we have to identify this possible world where P is true and check whether Q is true. Thus, the counterfactual, if P were true, Q would be true, is true if Q is true in the closest possible world. It's false, P is false, if Q is false in that world. And maybe your head is spinning right now, but that's okay because we're going to go through some examples. So here's an example statement. If this match had been struck, it would have lighted. That is a counterfactual statement. So let's say I have some matches. I haven't struck them, so it's not lit. Just this is my imaginary match and matchbox. I have imaginary matchbox. If this match had been struck, it would have lighted. Of course, I haven't struck it yet. It isn't lit. But let's look at what could have happened in some logically possible worlds that are close to our world. World number 1. The match was struck. Moreover, it was dry, oxygen was present, and the match was lit. Possible world number 2. The match was struck, it was dry, oxygen was present. Remember, you need oxygen, you need an oxidizer, but the match did not light. Now, which world, world 1 or 2, is closer to our world? Well, it's world number 1, possible world number 1. Why? Because in our world, we know that there's a lawful regularity such that when we strike matches and when the air is dry and there's lots of oxygen present, the match is light. Try lighting a match in the rain, right? You need special matches for that to work. You need they're like emergency, like storm, like hurricane matches that will light when they're wet. But you need special, those are special, right? I just have regular matches. And I know that in my world, if the air is dry and if there's a lot of oxygen present and I strike that match, it will light. The same thing happens in possible world number 1, but not in possible world number 2. So we can see that this law holds in world number 1. The law like regularity such that when I strike matches and it's dry and there's oxygen, they light. That regularity holds in world 1, not in world 2. So world number 1 is closer to our world. So sometimes we do have to refer to lawful regularities when we're using the possible worlds approach. Now, that was a pretty physical example, but what about like a mental physical example? Here's a statement. If Brian had not wanted to check out the noise, he wouldn't have gone downstairs. Okay. So Brian went downstairs to check out a noise, presumably because he wanted to. That's what we want to check. If Brian had not wanted to check out the noise, he wouldn't have gone downstairs. Okay, so what happens in the other possible worlds? World 3. Brian did not want to check the noise. He didn't go downstairs. Okay. World 4. Brian didn't want to check out the noise. He went downstairs anyway. So, which is closer to our world? If W4, world 4, is closer, that would falsify this statement. It would falsify that counterfactual. But we know that in world 3, Brian went downstairs to check out the noise. So the counterfactual is true. It is true that if he had not wanted to check out the noise, he wouldn't have gone downstairs. Kim says, the only plausible answer, again, seems to be something like this. We know or believe that there are certain lawful regularities and propensities governing Brian's wants, beliefs, and so on the one hand, and his behavior patterns on the other, and that given the absence of something like a desire to check out a suspicious noise, along with other conditions prevailing at the time, His not going downstairs at that particular time fits these regularities and propensities better than the supposition that he would have gone downstairs at the time. Are we back to square one again? Maybe not. We are looking for laws and appealing to laws when evaluating these counterfactuals, law-like regularities. But they're not quite like the laws of physics, or what we might call strict laws. They're more like ceteris paribus laws. Ceteris paribus. Anybody know what that means? Anyone know their Latin terms? Ceteris paribus means all things being equal. So, all things being equal laws means that there might be escape clauses. There are going to be exceptions to these laws. Again, think of how complicated this is. Think of the defeasibility of mental behavioral entailments, right? So these are not like the laws of nature, where, like, I don't know, what's a good law of nature? Somebody give me a law of physics here. A law like relation. How about Newton's second law? Which one is that one? Is that F equals ma? I forget which
Yeah.
ones are which.
Yes. F equals ma.
Okay, so force equals mass times acceleration. If you want to know the force of something in newtons, you need to take its mass and multiply it by its acceleration. That will give you the force of an object in newtons, in units that we call newtons. And that applies all over the universe. But these ceteris paribus laws that govern Brian and his behavior aren't like that. Maybe Brian didn't want to check out the noise, but he went downstairs anyway. Um, Again, there might be some escape clause. Sure, he didn't want to check out the noise because maybe he was afraid or lazy. But then he realized, well, what if I'm being burgled? Um, I better go downstairs anyway. So he grabs his baseball bat and heads downstairs, even though he doesn't really want to. Um, so ceteris paribus laws, not strict laws. So maybe we have to appeal to laws, sure, but they're of a different sort than the sort that maybe governs the law-like regularities between, say, C fiber activation and pain. Let's set all that aside for now. Another problem that we have to contend with here is something called the causal closure of the physical domain. You might find it helpful to think of the notion of Laplace's demon. Does anyone know this one? Pierre de Laplace and his demon?
I think it's like because the demon knows where all the atoms are in the universe, that he can technically predict everything, the future.
Yeah, basically, like the demon has complete knowledge of the physical. It knows all the laws of physics. It knows what all the atoms are doing. And so it could tell you, like, say, from the initial conditions of the universe, this demon could
Yeah.
predict, like, oh, in like 13.5 billion years, there's going to be this fleshy carbon-based guy named Dr. Josh Redstone, and he's going to be teaching a class on something called philosophy of mind,
I
right?
guess it's like determinism, where it's like, oh,
Yeah,
if we have perfect knowledge of the present, we should know the future, or like everything
ex
is caused.
exactly, exactly. Now, this is hard determinism. Um, Causal closure of the physical isn't quite like that, but it's similar. What causal closure of the physical says is that if an event has a cause occurring at a certain time, we'll call t, then it has a sufficient physical cause at t. So if our event x is a physical event and y is a cause or an effect of x, then y must also be physical. We never need to go outside of the physical to explain events. Our causal chains don't jump from the physical to the non-physical or from the non-physical to the physical. So that's causal closure of the physical. A couple of other things that I want to specifically nail down here, again following Kim, because Kim has dealt with this a lot. I think Kim has a book on physicalism actually, where this is like articulated and defended in much more detail. But causal closure of the physical domain does not say that a physical event can have no non-physical cause. It only says that in our search for causes, we never have to go beyond the physical. It also does not say that every physical event has a sufficient physical cause. That's a different claim. That would be like causal determinism, like Laplace's demon illustrates. Interestingly, causal closure of the physical is consistent with mind-body dualism. It's just that if there were immaterial minds, they wouldn't cause anything in the physical domain. So that's causal closure of the physical. Say there's an event. What's an event that you might think is okay, I got one. Say I'm sick. Okay, I have an illness. And I want to cover my bases because I really want to feel better. So I take medicine that the doctor gives me, and I also go to my spiritual healer who I don't know, shows me some crystals or something, or moves their hand like ooh and moves the energy around, not physical energy, but you know what I'm saying. So then I get better. On causal closure of the physical, the explanation uh, for my improvement in terms of my health it's got to be a physical cause. It's not, it's because I took the medicine. It's not because my spiritual healer fixed up my energies or something. So that's an example, causal closure of the physical. And remember, as Kim is constantly reminding us, that most thinkers nowadays, whether we're talking philosophers or physicists, most accept causal closure of the physical. Otherwise, we might end up appealing to supernatural or paranormal forces to explain things. This is something that I go over quite a bit. Well, not quite a bit, but in a little more detail in a course that unfortunately I'm not teaching this summer. And that course is Philosophy of the Paranormal, where we cover the history of the spiritualist movement in the United States and Great Britain and Europe, um, out of which emerged psychical research, and then subsequently parapsychology. And both psychical research and parapsychology suffered from this problem, where the physical world was not causally closed in their view. Um, and they both sort of fizzled out. They didn't really work as scientific, um, as proper scientific endeavors. If you're curious about any of that, I do have all of my old lectures up on YouTube. So you could go see what I did last summer if you really want to know. Uh, but that's where I would discuss this in greater detail. But you can see the problem, right? Uh, let's do an example that I might have covered in that class. Let me think of something. Well, there's one, and this often happens. Uh, Take, for example, precognition, which is the claim that um, people have knowledge of the future before events in the future occur. Actually, the book I use, it has an example of this opening one of the chapters on the paranormal. I use Susan Blackmore's book. Susan Blackmore is actually a former parapsychologist who kind of abandoned that project and now talks about consciousness and all kinds of cool, interesting things that really do exist. Anyway, Blackmore opens one of these chapters with with a man who recounts a dream he had, where he sees his friend in a hospital bed, hooked up to life support machines, as if she's been grievously injured. And he wakes up to a phone call which says that this friend who he was just dreaming about has just died in a car crash. And so he wonders, like, was this a precognitive dream? Did I receive knowledge from the future? Or at least knowledge of something that just happened in this sort of extrasensory motor, that is non-physical way, in this paranormal or supernatural way? Well, maybe you could explain it that way, but if you're going to go with the principle of the causal closure of the physical, you're probably not going to countenance any kind of precognition or extrasensory perception. Rather, you would say, well, it's probably a coincidence. And when you apply other things like the principle of parsimony, Occam's razor, and you do a little statistics, you realize that, say, for example, in a country like Great Britain, where Blackmore is writing and where this story comes from, there's the odds of somebody having a dream in which someone they know dies and then that friend dying. Well, not the I don't know the odds, but the frequency is that it happens to about one person every 2 weeks, which is more than you'd think. So anyway, please forgive that digression. I hope you found it interesting. So getting back to causal closure of the physical. Kim says on 215, suppose that a mental event M causes a physical event P. The closure principle says that there must also be a physical cause of P, an event which we'll call P star, occurring at the same time as M, that is a sufficient cause of P. This puts us in a dilemma. Either we have to say that M is P, namely we identify the mental cause with the physical cause as a single event, or else we have to say that P has two distinct causes, M and P star. That is, it is causally overdetermined. I'll illustrate this for you. So we have our physical event P. What caused it? Well, mental event causes P. Okay. But the causal closure principle says there must be a physical cause, P star, which causes P. Either we have to say that M and P star are the same. We identify them as the same. Or we'd have to say that P has two causes, M and P star, which would be a case of causal overdetermination. You don't need two causes where one would suffice. Make sense? I mean, this all turns on this right here, the exclusion principle. No event has two or more distinct sufficient causes all occurring at the same time unless it is a genuine case of overdetermination. Now, there are cases of causal overdetermination. We'll see one on the next slide. But does this little drawing, this messy drawing, help keep this clear for you?
Yep. Yep.
Awesome. So there are cases of causal overdetermination, as I said. Like, oh, it's actually not on the next slide. Well, I guess I imagined it. Well, let's go over the example that Kim uses. A genuine case of causal overdetermination, and this is very morbid, so apologies. But a genuine case of causal overdetermination would be the firing squad example. So I have committed a horrible crime, and I am sentenced to die by firing squad. So I'm standing there blindfolded. I got a target on my chest, and the firing squad, maybe it's, I don't know, say it's like 10 people with rifles. They all shoot at the same time. All of those bullets hitting me at the same time are what kill me. Not any one of them, all 10, if they're all fired at precisely the same time and they all hit the same target. That's a case of genuine causal overdetermination. But the exclusion principle says that in cases that are not genuinely causally overdetermined, there can only be one sufficient physical cause. So let's assume a case, as Kim does, where a mental event causes a physical event, and we schematize it as follows. We say that M, our mental event, is a cause of P. Now it follows from premise number 1 and from the principle of the causal closure of the physical that there's also a physical event, P star, that occurs at the same time. Just like on the previous slide. In fact, I'll bring it back. And there's a little bit that's bugging me here that I have to erase. Okay, let's get rid of the arrows. Oh, it's so messy, I can't stand it, but I guess that's how it goes when you don't have a proper stylus. So one gives us this, right? We have a mental event causing a physical event. Concurrently, there must be a physical event causing the physical event. So M is a cause of P, but it follows from 1, as well as the principle of causal closure, that P star is a cause of P. And we're also supposing that, oh, look at that, it's already underlined for me. We're also supposing that these two are not identical. M is not identical with P star. And we're supposing that this is not a genuine case of overdetermination, like the firing squad. Kim points out, according to 1, 2, and 3, quote, P has two distinct causes, M and P star. And since premise 4 says that this is not a case of overdetermination, the exclusion principle kicks in, saying that either M or P star must be disqualified as a cause of P. So we have to get rid of one of these, either M or P star. Oh my goodness, what happened? There we go. The reason is simple. If we try to retain M, this is one of these must be disqualified. Which one goes? P star stays, M must go. Here's the reason. If we try to retain M, the closure principle kicks in again and says that there must also be a physical cause of P. And what could this be if not P star? Obviously, we are back in the same situation. Unless we eliminate M, cross you out, and keep P star, we would be off to an infinite regress or treading water forever in the same place. So we therefore conclude that M is not a cause of P. Get rid of that. Actually, let's delete. So M is not a cause of P. Get rid of our little arrow of causation there. M is not a cause of P, and premise 1 is false. And when generalized, we arrive at something like the following. Mental events never cause physical events. So we're back to epiphenomenalism. Scary. Because we don't want epiphenomenalism to be true. If epiphenomenalism is true, then as Fodor says, everything I believe is wrong and my whole world is over. Can we make things better by looking at mind-body supervenience, or do things get worse when we consider mind-body supervenience? What is mind-body supervenience? We've covered it before, but let's go over it again. Mind-body supervenience says the following. When a mental property M is instantiated by something X at T, that is in virtue of the fact that X instantiates at T a physical property P, such that anything that has P at any time necessarily has M at the same time. Maybe I should bust out my crude drawing tools again. So the time is T. Okay. And X, let's just say there exists an X. Okay. And X has, that's D for definitions. So X has M. We're not going to worry about how this looks, okay? X has M. And on supervenience, X must also have, at that same time, P, such that anything that has M has P at the same time, at time T. Make sense? Make sense? Let me know if it doesn't. We've got lots of time. I think we're going to finish on time. So if you're not sure, let me know. But basically, on mind-body supervenience, if I have a mental property like being in pain, that's instantiated in me at a certain time. Like, I don't know, I get a paper cut and I'm in pain. That's because at the same time I'm instantiating a physical property like my C fibers firing, and anything that has C fiber activation will at the same time have pain. Now we can formulate the following. Suppose that a mental event, like an instantiation of mental property M, causes another mental property, M star, to instantiate. Okay, now number 2. According to mind-body supervenience, M is instantiated on this occasion in virtue of the fact that a physical property, one of its supervenience bases, is instantiated on this occasion. Call this physical base P star. Let's draw it again. I'm going to change color so it's a little brighter. And actually, let's make my pen. Is there a bigger pen? Maybe we'll try this. Okay, so I have a mental prop. Whoa, no, okay, that's not what I wanted. Okay, I just want to draw. Oh, I'm so dumb. There it is, thick. Okay, so I have M, and I have M because at the same time I instantiate P. Now let's say that M causes M star. According to supervenience, at the same time, I must also have a physical supervenience base for M star, which we call P star. So why is M star instantiated on this occasion? What's responsible for the fact that it occurs to me on this occasion? There are 2 answers. Either M caused M star, which is what we originally suppose, and because the supervenience base of M star, P star, was instantiated on this occasion. Okay. But there are good reasons to think that this option, number 2, because the supervenience base, where's my pen? I've gone backwards again. Oh, it's moved up here. Okay. Oh, running low on coffee here. Bring this back down here so that I know where it is. This is true because the supervenience base P star is instantiated on this occasion, and that is what instantiated M star. Okay, now that's what trumps 1. Why? Well, what's doing the causal work here? What do you think? Did M cause M star? But M supervenes on P. Did M cause P star? Or did P cause P star and M star merely supervenes on P star? This is what it looks like is happening. We can reconcile these claims if, in fact, we say that M caused M star to instantiate by causing M star's supervenience base P star to instantiate. So M causes P star. That's an instance of mental to physical causation. At least that's what we want. We want to show that that's possible. But the exclusion argument says that mental physical causation is not possible. This is what we call radical epiphenomenalism. Let me clear all my drawings out of the way. This is radical epiphenomenalism. Like what we're trying to do is show that on supervenience theory, mental events can cause other mental events just in case mental physical causation is possible. So a mental event can cause a mental event by virtue of the fact that it causes the supervenience base of the mental event to instantiate. But the exclusion argument says this shouldn't be possible. This would be like overdetermination. And if that's true, neither mental nor mental physical causation is possible. That is radical epiphenomenalism. Not very appealing, is it? Why not? Well, again, everything I believe is wrong and my whole world is over. I am not an agent. I have no free will. I cannot be asked to give agentive accounts of my actions. I cannot be held morally responsible for my actions. I can't be praised for what I do right. I can't be punished for what I do wrong. It's a problem. But you might say, to heck with that. No. No, I don't buy radical epiphenomenalism. Well, Kim thinks that your other option then is to go with reductionist physicalism, like identity theory. And that's not a very palatable option either. This is what Fodor was worried about. It's like our whole world is coming apart here. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think your world is coming apart? Does this worry you as much as it worries me and Fodor? I want to hear from you. I really do.
I think luckily I have too many things going on to be worried about it. Like other
Yeah,
concerns.
I've got to work on my essay. I can't be worried about
Yeah.
whether I'm an automaton.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I think. And again, whenever I'm not one of those professors who's afraid to give my personal opinion, but I always sort of um I give you like a huge disclaimer where like this is my personal opinion and this is what I think. You don't have to think this, but this is what I think. Again, what I said earlier when we were talking about epiphenomenalism and Huxley and Alexander, etc. I think it would be very, very silly if mentality in general and consciousness specifically evolved if it had no work to do. I think that would be really weird. And I think what Kim is doing here is very, very like pure philosophy in the sense that it's like very, very like metaphysics of mind sort of stuff. And that's great. I'm not knocking Kim, but I am a more empirically oriented thinker. Like I'm no Jagwan Kim, okay? Um, I'm not half the philosopher Kim was. But I am, I think, a little bit more attentive toward the empirical side of things. And call this an argument from personal incredulity if you want to, but I don't. I just don't understand why mentality would have evolved if it had no work to do. And that's what saves the world for me. Um, so make of that what you will. If you're not worried about it, I guess great, right? Like maybe you're too busy, or maybe you're happy. You're like, so what if I'm a conscious automaton? It's fine. I'm happy. Great. That's great. I worry about it, and I dispel my worries with a sort of almost like an evolutionary approach to all of this. Some further issues. One, and um, we're we're going to kind of touch on a little bit more of this next time. But one issue has to do with the extrinsicness of mental states. Um, you might recall, for example, the Chinese room that we talked about last week. One of the things that Searle tries to do with this thought experiment um, is he tries to show us that computers compute by using syntax alone, and they're kind of blind to the semantics. As Kim says, they operate on like the shapes of the symbols. Um, I think maybe I would say the structure rather than the shapes. And by structure, I don't just mean like how they might look to us. I mean the structure of how the symbols interact with one another. It's like a mechanical sort of thing. It does not matter and cannot matter to a computer what the symbols it operates on mean. All that matters is the structure of the symbols. So what matters is their syntax, not their semantics. It's the programmers who assign meaning to the symbols that a computer uses. And that's why Searle says that their semantics are parasitic rather than intrinsic to the syntax. Why do I bring this up? Well, following Kim, there's a really, really big theory of the mental that emerges from functionalism called the computational representational theory of the mind, or computationalism for short. Basically, it's what we covered last week. The mind is like a computer. Cognition is computation. Cognition is rule-governed information processing. So if it's true, we mentally compute. And we do this, argues Jerry Fodor, in a symbolic, formal language that he calls the language of thought, which is realized by the brain and by, various states and processes and stuff that's going on in the brain. It's not a natural language. It's not like if you have an inner monologue and you're like in your mind, what will I order for supper? Pizza or burgers? Pizza. I'll get pizza. It's not like that. And not everyone even has an inner monologue, but for those that do, your inner monologue is not the language of thought. No, your language of thought is a formal, like logical language implemented by or realized by the brain. And in that sense, we are like a computer and we think in this language of thought. If this is all true, then do the contents of our mental states bear any causal relevance to our mental processes? If we are like computers, then do the semantics matter? Do they play a causal role? That's another issue that needs to get sorted out. It's not straightforwardly clear that they do, that the semantics or the contents do play a causal role. So that is to say, it's not necessarily clear that the contents bear no causal role. Okay, just make sure I'm clear on that. And we see this when we look at the twin Earth thought experiment. We'll look at this more next time. But just to give you the gist of it, we've got Earth, and on Earth there's water. And on Earth, our water is made of H2O. Or it's not made of, it is H2O. 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom, H2O. Delicious water. On twin Earth, everything is exactly the same. There's twin Earth professor Josh, who's teaching twin Earth philosophy of mind at twin Earth Carleton University. It's the exact same, except for one thing. The water on twin Earth is not made of H2O. It's made of XYZ. When people on twin Earth ask for a glass of water, they're asking for XYZ, not H2O. The meaning of the word water and the contents of twin Earth Josh and his thoughts when he desires a glass of water, and the contents of my thoughts on Earth, my desire for a glass of water, are different. My thought of having a glass of water is about H2O. When I utter the word water, it refers to H2O. Twin Josh, when he thinks about water, he's thinking about XYZ. When he desires a glass of water, he desires a glass of XYZ. What these contents mean, their semantics, is fixed by causal historical relations with their content. So contents, Kim says, do not supervene on the intrinsic properties of the states that carry them, my mental states, that is. On the other hand, we expect behavior causation to be local and depend only on intrinsic properties of the behaving organism. This, then, is yet another problem of mental causation. It challenges us to answer the following question. How can intentional mental states like beliefs and desires be efficacious in behavior causation in virtue of their contents, if their contents are, as we'll see next time, wide as opposed to narrow? But we're not going to worry too much about that. I just mention it because Kim does. That's all I have for today. Are there any questions before we get going? Adrian, go ahead.
So for this planet Earth idea, right? It's very similar to like a parallel reality type idea.
Sort of. I mean, it, the idea is not that it's a different universe, although you could think of it that way. It's just that somewhere out there is another Earth that's exactly the same as our Earth in every respect, but their water is made of a different bunch of molecules than our water is. And what it's meant to show is that what the word water means, or what the content of mental states about water represents, is something different in each case, and the meaning is fixed by your sort of history of associations with what your thoughts or your utterances represent.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Um,
Thanks so much.
yeah, no problem. Like I said, next time when we talk about mental content, we're going to spend a lot of time on the twin Earth thought experiment. So there's no need to, if it sounds funny and you're like, I'm not quite sure what's going on. It's fine because we're going to go over it a bunch more. But that's the idea. Like my word water and Josh's word water cannot mean the same thing, even though syntactically they're the same. Semantically they're different by virtue of our different histories of associations with what that word refers to on our respective planets. Anyway, I don't want to over explain it. We can get into the weeds next time. Are there any other questions before we cease for the day? All right. Well,
I
if there
guess I have a
oh,
question. It's like,
Timothy?
when can we expect to get the feedback for the essay proposal? No rush, obviously, but I'm just like
Well,
curious.
I'm aiming for last day of class.
Last
Hopefully
day of
sooner.
class. Okay.
Yeah,
See.
hopefully sooner.
Right.
But it is about to be a very busy time for me. I'm heading
Mhm.
to Ottawa. I'm going to convocation. Our TA, Jack, is also graduating. So
Oh,
congrats, Jack.
congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations to Jack. Um, so it's busy. I think we can still do it. So I'll let you know.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my main question there was like, okay, so we can expect about 1 week to work on the final draft of the essay. Around a week, a little more.
How long is the exam period?
So, um, you said it's the last day of class, which would be the 18th.
Uh-huh.
And on Brightspace, you have the due date listed as the 27th, I believe. So that would
Okay,
be,
yeah, yeah, that's not a lot of time. So we'll try and get that done as soon as we can.
yeah, I don't know when the final examination date is. It might be longer. I'm not sure. I can look it up. Yes.
It would be the last day of the exam period.
University exam
So
period.
that's the 27th.
Okay. Well, yeah, that would be about
Yeah.
at
So
least two
okay,
days more than a
so
week.
so we're gonna try and get that done as soon as we can.
Mhm.
Just know that like you're gonna have to bear with us because, like I said, it's a
Oh
very
yeah,
busy
no,
time.
no rush.
However, I will say the essay, 16 to 1800 words, that's not that long.
Hmm.
That's like 6 pages. So it's not a crazy long essay, and I know you can do it.
Hmm.
And you can get started now. Just don't overcommit,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know?
because we need to wait. Might want to wait for the feedback there
Yeah.
to see
Yeah.
what exactly.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, I'll see you all on Wednesday. Um, bye for now.
See you on Wednesday.
See you then.